put ego aside and go, no, for the betterment of my kids, I get to build this bridge so that we can hold space for them. Mm-hmm. And that's not easy, especially when we're in a generation of men that grew up without male leadership to create humility and learn how to put ego aside for the betterment of the family.
He's done miracles on me. Back again, he's done. Back again, he's done miracles. Back again, he's done miracles on me.
What's going on? You gotta find a way to beat out the system that's trying to ultimately make you fail.
And it's really like, it's really like the US that has like this individualistic, we all have to live separate mindset, right? Like in the Caribbean, my Aunt P, God rest her soul, like Auntie and Uncle Carl had this massive house, right? It was 2 kitchens, 3 living rooms, like each kid had like their own section, but everyone lived in the same house. Everyone put the same money in the house. You're never not without a babysitter or support or help, but everyone still had their own space. So you weren't on top of each other, but there's no way that everyone could have been as successful or become a lawyer, become a doctor, the other one a journalist, etc. if everyone was trying to do that on their own individually without that community and that support.
Damn, coming to America Caribbean style. We had our own wing in a kitchen and that's what's up. But the reality is, our community was built that way. That's why the saying was actually developed in people of color. It takes a village to raise a child, because villages were the family structure. Mm-hmm. And I mean, not to go off track, but the system was designed to break us up. And RJ talked on a couple of those reasons, between the crack epidemic, the war on drugs, and the arrest rates and the incarceration rates. Like all of those things, even back, if we're going to go back into slavery, when you extract the man, the husband, the father from the family dynamic, you can do anything you want with the women and children. And that then removes the structure, and that has been perpetrated. And now we're in a generation that realizes the value. Side note, because this came up for me a second ago. Ladies, if you have a father that is trying to be present in his children's lives, stop being the headache and the barrier that prevents that from happening. We are setting our kids up for failure. Now, ladies, if you have fathers that ain't and they're not showing up, that's different. But I do personally have male friends in my life that are trying to be present, and they're being faced with adversity, and it's only a disservice to the children.
Right.
So that, like, it's super important that we actually speak to that, because it's crucial. This also then gives us the power to go, who am I procreating or creating life with? Like, let's take our time and start to get really clear on who we're creating life with. Because if things happen and there's a division later in life, what I've noticed, and I know that this is realistic for men in my life, is when you make a conscious decision and life just happens, you guys separate ways. I've seen those couples co-parent so powerfully, because in their understanding of each other was, we made this decision, we created life. It's our responsibility to be present for that life. And I kudos to those people who are like, yo, we're going to be big. And you don't have to stay together to create an environment that gives your children the balance that they need between their mother and their father. And it's just super, super important. And that's how we break these generational curses of kids growing up in dynamics without a male figure, without their father, without that presence and guidance. It's going to change things for the better. And I just think it's super important that we make sure we address that.
Yeah, and just speaking on that dynamic, it's having actual birthdays together and not 2 separate birthdays, because it still gives the same thing in actuality. And I was one that was guilty of it, and can speak on the fact of, when you go through a hardship with a person and you break up and there's things said and you get your feelings involved and stuff like that, you feel like, well, forget it. And you listen to the wrong sources that tell you division. at some point it came down to me praying and asking God and not anybody else or anybody else trying to give their 2 cents. And that's when God was like, no, what you need to do is buy her a gift and start doing the things to work towards doing things together.
So I didn't want to put King's business in the street. But I want to give you your roses now, because I watched you as a man put ego aside and go, no, for the betterment of my kids, I get to build this bridge so that we can hold space for them. Mm-hmm. And that's not easy, especially when we're in a generation of men that grew up without male leadership to create humility and learn how to put ego aside for the betterment of the family. Like you said, your grandfather did. Like he showed up. And you could see your grandfather emerge in you when you were like, no, I'm gonna figure this out so I can show up and be present. It's a really big deal, bro.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you. Because yeah, you speaking on it. Like a lot of times as men with your ego and your pride, you're like, nah, I just don't want it. It's like you almost trying to fight this battle and you have to let that battle go because it's not your battle. You got to think about, you may be gone in the next 40 years, but your kids going to still be here or your grandkids. And if that's what you're putting out in the atmosphere, it's going to trickle down. Because a lot of times we learned a lot of parenting from our parents. And, but some things we did learn is like, well, man, you wasn't telling the truth about what you said. Like, bro, like, you might have to do that a little different. And, one thing that we do in general with, the children and stuff like that, I have sit downs, but I'll get on them. But I also leave a space for them to speak up. If you feel something is different, let me see your logic and we can go back and balance and see like it is you just trying to really get away with something or do you have a valid point? And a lot of times I've had to swallow it with my children. I'm like, nah, this ain't going to be, because every child is different. So they're parented different. You know what I'm saying? If everybody know my love son, Miko, you know what I'm saying? I had to be down on him like all the time. But the great part about it, he's grown up to be a great young man with a great work ethic. Mm-hmm. He got it because he saw it from me. You know what I'm saying? And they see more of what you do than what you say. Right. So no matter what I said, he wasn't hearing. He's like, man, my dad busts his butt. He get out there, he go grind, he do this, he do that. And it was a time I pulled up on his job and I see my son pulling tables out. He's just going through cleaning up, doing this and going the extra above mile. And I'm like, dang. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it warmed my heart because I like, he got it. And it's not until you see it in action that you really know that they got it. And the thing was, considering my life versus my children's life, they're so much more better than we were. Our children are so much more better than us.
And I think what like drives that point home was something you said, right? Like there's 4 parenting styles, right? Authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and then dismissive, right? And that authoritative is what we should strive to be, which is high in demand, but also high in responsiveness. So this is my expectation of you, but I'm also going to love you, hear you out, and it's better. Whereas that we grew up with was that very authoritarian, do as I say, and it's just because I said it, and you're just like saying it out, right? And you're like, but that doesn't make. I don't want to do that, and this is why I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, you're supposed to, and you're like, but there's no conversation, right? And part of child development is that curiosity, right? Cognitive development, all that is, you have to answer those questions. That's how we learn, is by asking questions and getting answers. Because I said so doesn't help anyone learn. It just keeps you in the same spot.
And it also just refutes the ability of that child to recognize their own independence, their own thought process. And they're like, well, then what I think doesn't matter if I can't speak it. I can't share it. And while we're giving out flowers, I got to recognize this dude right here, in the salmon, stunting. Because one thing that I've taken from him, and again, I don't have kids, but to be in conversation with someone who's like, no, I make sure I sit down and intentionally create an environment where my son can share openly. Because he, again, similar to King, made it a point and an effort to be like, I'm going to be a present father. We're going to make us work so it can be a healthy environment for him. And kudos to you, bro, for also holding that space, because it's cool to see. And I know this is our like personal conversation, but Shannon will say things and I'll be like, damn, your son talks to you about that? And he'll be like, yeah, but that doesn't happen on accident. That happens on purpose. Mm-hmm. Like you have to walk into that with the intention of, I'm going to create a healthy, loving environment. I'm still your father, but I love you enough that your voice matters. And it's a really big deal, man. So big ups to you, bro. Appreciate you.
Let me add on that, because I think parents forget oftentimes, and we have to be slowed down and reminded, our children deal with life just like we do. They go through the same segregation and stuff like that. And we think sometimes, like, even just talking to my daughter, as of recently, because she was going through some tough things, and which it's important that you talk to your kids, because this is why stuff happens when they think they got to go through it alone, or they kill their stuff and stuff. And I know we come from an age where people, bagged on each other and then went in there. We could say, we like, oh, you gotta be, as long as you do the yo mama joke, you know what I'm saying? We ain't finna box. But now it's at a point where when somebody says something racist to you, and you think like when you come into this community and we put them in a better environment where it's safe, that we don't, consider that a lot of times the cultural difference. Because our kids are more comfortable in Tempe, where it's diverse. Over here, it's not. And not to go into too much detail, but we had to have a talk, and I had to remind her of her value, her worth, and the aspect of who you are. And that it's not a point where you can't, because some people are like, don't value what they say. I said, no, find value in yourself. Because if you value yourself, the things that are not, or what you don't hold value to, will not affect you. And that's the difference. Some people just be like, oh, kind of brush it off, shut up and leave it alone. But I was like, look, you got to understand, you are a multicultural individual. You have Japanese heritage, you have Black heritage, and there's a lot of things you had to that your generations went through and persecuted through, that still gonna trickle into this day. They like to sweep and act like it don't happen, but if these kids are saying these things, it means they got it from somewhere.
Exactly.
And so it still happens in these communities, and nobody should have to go to school and feel like they're crying or going through something. And so when once again, the community in the village just said, hey, bro, you need to look at this. You know what I'm saying? You need to address this. So I said, cool. Pump the brakes. I made my life where I could hit the brakes. Let's go get some coffee. Let's sit down and let's talk. And I hugged her and I kissed her and I said, you got to remember something. We live a blessed and beautiful life. And sometimes people are upset because you are blessed. A lot of people want you to do good, just not better than them. So when you're doing things, and I said, baby, you got to understand, sometimes you got to hold near and dear that if these people are not vacationing at this place or doing these things and you're talking about it, they may hate you for those things. But the way that they know that they can get to you is to take these shots. But what you have to learn is to operate in love, because it's hard to combat love. You got to understand and be like, look, I appreciate you as a person, and I would never disrespect you the way you do. But at this point, we're no longer friends. And if you can't respect my boundaries, which we wasn't taught, because that's why people could molest us as kids and stuff like that, because there were no boundaries of saying no. And that's why when to be seen and not heard, you don't speak up. Yeah. My daughter, Joelle, was one very timid and never speak up. I'm like, no, you need to speak up what's not right. I said, I want to do it. And I asked my daughters and stuff like, has anybody touched you inappropriately? Ain't did this, did that. I said, is anybody treating you a different way? And one thing is, come hell and high water, my children called me one time and I pulled up, because their protection is my utmost importance. And when you keep showing up like that, it's like, at least I know I may not call them on all the little stuff. They may talk to their mama stuff, but when it's an emergency, I'm calling daddy. Because I'm popping the trunk and airing it out for my kids. I said, that's going to be one I'm going to take it for. And when the kids know that, it's like when you get into it for those, and I know Mark's situation is not like that, but I didn't have that same situation where like my daddy could whoop your daddy. But like, you know what I'm saying? I was like, but all my uncles gonna jump,
Fact.
That's it.
Fact. Even a little one.
Even a little one. It's because when you see that, because you look at these people like Superman and stuff like that, and you have these figures, and for those ones who didn't have it, because even though I had great examples and they wasn't perfect, that was my community. That's my heritage. That's what I learned up to. And I look past the negative for all the positive. Because one thing I could say is that we can throw a get together and have a good time, because that's what we were taught. Because everybody's family until you wasn't family. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody come in, spread food, have a good time, chill, be at home, hugs and love. A lot of that I learned from the men. And my grandfather was not a hugger. It was my grandmother who embedded in my uncles and myself to hug and to learn to love. So her balance, but we also knew like you wasn't playing around with granddaddy, because if you look at it, you have to be strong a lot of times, because the lineages, if you know my mom and my uncles, they very strong. So it took a granddaddy to check them and get them in line. You know what I'm saying? So
But he was still soft.
he was very soft, especially when he got older. When the grandkids came in, he started getting soft. We were still kind of considered like they kids because they raised us. And for the most part, they seen us all the time. But like our children and stuff, man, he was a little teddy bear. He was buying them stuff. He letting them hug. He was kissing them. I was like, man, you ain't the same dude. But now being,
Not supposed to be.
yeah, you're not.
You got to set the standard, and then you get to bestow the love. And I mean, similar to that point, because not having that, it's been my life's intention to surround myself with men that, like, I pray to God. I know I'll be clear. I pray to God I never have a daughter. Never in my life. Because I also know that I'm a 0 to 100 type person. So if I'm like, yo, dear God, please give me twin boys. This is my prayer and affirmation every single day. Twin boys. Because then if I have a daughter after that, she's got lines at the fence. Because like RJ said, I'm airing it out. And I know myself. But I also know that I have very specific men in my life that I go, my family's going to be good whether I'm present or not. Because I know if I go 0 to 100, that I'll be like, yo, Jay, yo, Shannon, Clint, like, I just need you to look over the family while I'm gone, because you can still build the community even if you didn't have it, right? Like, even if it's not already in your bloodline, you can still build a family because blood makes you relatives. Family is a whole nother level of showing up for people and holding space. And that's something I'm really excited about. The caliber of men that I have in my life. I'm like, okay, we're going to be good no matter what it looks like.
And to your point, and I think all of you guys kind of addressed it too. But it's just the way that we're raising our kids is a lot different than the way that we were raised, where, you know, you tell your kids your responsibility is to go to school, keep this house clean. That's what you do. I don't care if you got an attitude or whatever, you got to keep these grades up and stuff. But like, even being able to talk to the kids now and find out, well, what's going on? Why are you struggling in school? And finding out, oh, there's issues that you're dealing with people at school that is affecting your mood or affecting your self-esteem. And that's why you're struggling in school. It's not because you're not smart or you don't care about the grades. It's just something else. And that's something I don't think that necessarily our parents knew how to do. They never learned that, or, you know, maybe they just, because they weren't taught it, they just didn't care to engage in that of talking to your kids about what's going on with you. And so we make it a point to have those conversations with them on a regular basis. Like, hey, how was school? No, like, for real. Like, don't be like, oh, it was good. No, what happened? Like, I'll sit down with, especially the girls, because Jeremiah be like, it was good, Mom. Stop asking. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But the girls be like, oh, Auntie, let me tell you what happened today. Okay, so this and this and this. And like, we have those conversations. That's where they, you know, learn to trust you and open up. So when stuff does happen, then they're like, this is what happened. What do I do in this situation? And then they feel like they have someone to talk to, and it helps them to grow and develop in who they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's room for growth too. Like, I've seen parents, I can talk to my pops too. Like, I think there's something that clicked, and then, cause we were not close growing up, like, I wouldn't be like, oh, my daddy gonna whip. I'd be like, he might, like, like, no, I'd be like, yeah, he probably would, but I wasn't saying it with no emphasis in my chest, right? But the older I got and like the experiences I've had, like, we've had that 180 completely, whereas like, he'll sit there, he'll say, is there a problem? And I'd be like, no, you good. You can sit down, like, there's no, the situation's been handled. He'd be like, all right. And I'd be like, oh yeah, my dad's gonna kill you. Right. But there's room for growth, and to see that generation, and I've seen it with clients, parents, etc., to come around and say, hey, like, I didn't handle this well because I didn't know. But now that I know better, I'm trying to do better. And I think it's also up to us. Like, we're in a weird generation gap where it's for us to do better for the next, but also give grace for the generation before us that they're trying to come back and learn, and us trying to build that a little bit forward.
I look at it now, though. A lot of our parents were trying to put us in positions that they weren't able to achieve or didn't have access to. So even I think about, like, oh, you better get your homework done. I'm like, you ain't even get through 6th grade, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but in the back of your mind, you're like, but you don't even know how to spell encyclopedia. What you mean you want me to do a book report? But that's because we were super aware, and they were unable to talk us through or walk us through areas in life because they didn't have access to it. So they're like, no, you got to do it because I couldn't. So they wanted to put us in a better position, but didn't actually know how to be present for that. And that came up a lot for me. And Jay, to your point, like, when we moved from Miami to Arizona, I had never had such a culture shock in my life. And like, I dealt with racism in the South, but it was like, your Confederate flag lets me know that your yard isn't a yard that I'm trick-or-treating at, right? Like, it was like, oh, cool, you don't rock with us? Got it. We just keep our distance. But here you got people that smile in your face, and then they'll make a comment, and you'll be like, yo, wait. Like, I know you didn't just say what I think you said. And when I first moved here, we were fighting. I was fighting all the time. And it was my assistant principal that pulled me aside. He was a small little white dude, but he grew up in Fort Lauderdale, which was only like 10 minutes from where I grew up. And he was like, you got to understand, Marcus, like, these kids are different. They've been coddled and protected, but they've also been tainted. Like, some of the comments that they're making, they don't realize what they're actually saying. They're just kind of like repeating things that they've heard on the side and whatnot. And my grandma was the one who enlightened me. She was like, baby, and obviously her now being 94 years old, she grew up through it, like in North Carolina, on a plantation, right? Like, that was her world. She goes, if you fight everyone that calls you the N-word, you'll be fighting for the rest of your life. She's like, but you got to kill people with not kindness, but progress. She's like, just prove to yourself what you're worth. Like, don't get distracted by the distractions. And it took a whole nother level of awareness for me. Like, oh, okay. You're only coming for me because you recognize I'm a threat. That's the only reason I'm on your radar. I was like, oh, you just can't stop my progress. So it was but having someone in my life that was able to have that level of conversation, because to be honest, like, I wish my bigger brother was here to be like, yo, let's roll up to the school. Because I know that there have been kids in my life. There are kids in my life that aren't my blood, but they're like, yo, I'm getting bullied at school. And like Jay said, like, my schedule's to the point where I'm like, looks like we rolling up to school. And I pull up in the cafeteria and they're like, yo, who that? And you're like, that's my uncle. And I'm like, he black. You're right. But seeing the confidence in that child to be like, yo, I got somebody who has my back. I'm like, yo, I wish I had that. So now the opportunity to be that is an absolute game changer. And then to still have the conversation, like, no, you don't have to fight everybody that disrespects you. But my grandma was like, yo, they can disrespect you so many times, but we don't start it. We definitely finish it. I was like, got it.
Make sure you subscribe and come back next week for the continuation of this conversation.
Figured out. They'll have that other spouse that came before the spouse they gotten figured out. They just don't have it figured out. It is what it is. I mean, it is what it is. So literally, when you start giving people that grace, you can get that grace to yourself. I'm just getting older. I'm just figuring it out. I'm doing my